In the committee knows that the Department of Justice has within it a special counsel investigation that is underway. When Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein came to speak to all of us, he was asked to explain how this setup actually operates. Where are the boundaries and what is the shape of the special counsel investigation vis-a-vis the Department of Justice? That, I think, is a very reasonable question to ask. It's a question whose answer I think we are entitled to in our oversight responsibilities. Senator Graham and I followed up, because that was a verbal request at the hearing, with a letter on May 26, putting in writing that request. Explain to us how the boundaries are going to exist between the Department of Justice and the special counsel investigation. We got no answer whatsoever, nothing. So we sent another letter in July 27th. After 2 months of no answer, we sent a second letter. The Department of Justice came in yesterday to see me with Mr. Demers, who's a candidate for the National Security Division position, and under the pressure of that advice and consent responsibility, they actually produced their response dated September 27th, which is, by my count, 5 months after the original request. And, 4 months after the original request. And it is, I'll submit all 3 letters with permission for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. The response is a complete non-response response. It doesn't really tell us anything. So here's what I think we know. I think we know that the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, has access to the special counsel investigation. I don't have a problem with that because he's a career person. I have no doubts about his integrity, and he has administrative reasons for having access within that investigation to some degree because he's the head of the department for this purpose. I believe that Dana Bente, the current National Security Division chief, has access to this investigation. And I don't object to that either, because he's a career guy. I have enormous confidence in him. At one point, he wore all 3 hats. He was the Attorney General, U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District while the grand jury was running. He was the National Security Division head, and he was the acting Deputy Attorney General in charge of this investigation before it was set up as special counsel and before the recusal. So I've got no problem with that either. But it does raise the question that if senior members of the department have access to the special counsel investigation, what are going to be the rules for the chief of the criminal division? Is the chief of the criminal division going to be sitting in briefings and meetings with Rod Rosenstein and with Dana Bente or Demers, his successor, talking about the special counsel investigation? If that's going to be the case, I think we all ought to have a pretty big problem with that, because as Chairman Feinstein said, this is not a person whose path to the chief of the criminal division is paved by prosecutive experience. The only apparent qualification he brings to this job is his close political relationship with the Attorney General, with whom he served for many years on this committee, which again is fine, except for the fact that the Attorney General is recused from this investigation. So what we have right now is a big unanswered question about what the boundaries are going to be that are going to protect Mr. Benczkowski from being a back-channel source of information from this special counsel investigation to the recused Attorney General. That ought to be an easy question to answer. The easy answer is he's recused. He's politically close to this Attorney General who is recused, so he is recused. We can't get that answer. Yeah. We can't get any answer. The department is not disclosing what the contours of the special counsel investigation is, who's allowed to have access, who's allowed not to have access. They've told us none of that. So we have unanswered questions that we deserve to have answers to about where that boundary is and how it's being enforced between special counsel and the General Department of Justice. And we have a particularly acute problem with whether this fellow is going to come in and be a quiet back channel for information that he will then have access to the recused Attorney General. I think it's a fair question to get an answer to. And we can then argue about what the answer should be. If they say he's recused, great, it goes away. If they say, well, we're going to do this, that, or the other, we can evaluate that. But at this point, we don't even have answers. We're being asked to vote on this person in a fog of confusion about whether or not he's basically going to serve as the eyes and ears of the recused Attorney General into the special counsel investigation. That, I think we all have a common interest in assuring does not happen.
I want to ask you a question in return. And not knowing exactly how this operates within the Justice Department, so take that into consideration. You didn't get answers to your questions from the people you asked. Would it be proper to expect the ethics people or the ethics division or whatever you want to call it within DOJ to outline what those ought to be?
I think what would be really proper, and Senator Graham and I had a hearing on this exact question, which is when there's a special counsel investigation, what is the role of Congress? And what are we allowed to ask, and where should we stay away, and how should this all happen? And it was very clear from that hearing that we are absolutely entitled in our oversight responsibility to know how the special counsel investigation is being firewalled from the rest of the department. Well, we're not entitled to go and look and ask questions about what evidence have you got, who are you interviewing, all that kind of stuff, but at least how it is properly firewalled, that's an obvious question for us to have answers to, and this letter is ridiculous. So I don't think fobbing it off on the ethics people is the answer. I think the department should be responsible about answering legitimate questions from this committee, particularly in response to a pair of bipartisan letters that they ignored for 4 months. I don't see how that makes any sense at all.
Mr. Chairman, would you permit me to...
This is less a Benchkowski problem than it is a we are not getting the information that we need problem, and he just provokes it.
Senator
I
Corn.
just want to ask Senator Whitehouse a question. My recollection was Rod Rosenstein, as Deputy Attorney General, the Attorney General having recused, that he's told us here under oath that he was responsible for appointing the special counsel, and that the special counsel acts semi-autonomously but reports to him.
Yep.
And not the Attorney General or anybody else. Am I missing something here? Why in the world would Robert Mueller be influenced by any other person at the Department of Justice, because he doesn't report to them, and nor would, I presume, they be privy to what he is doing?
Because the head of the National Security Division also has access to the investigation and probably should, in order that should counterintelligence information emerge from the Mueller investigation, that it goes quickly to the National Security Division so they can disseminate that information through the intelligence community. So now we have the Deputy Attorney General and the head of the National Security Division, both with access to this investigation as far as we know. That seems to be the case. Nobody said that's not the case. And the question is, when this guy comes in as chief of the criminal division, what access will he have? The National Security Division and the Criminal Division are connected pretty close. The Chief of Criminal and the Deputy Attorney General are pretty close. All I'm looking for, I think, is a clear reassurance that because of his political relationship with the Attorney General, who is recused, there will be adequate firewalls in place to make sure that doesn't become a way of leaking special counsel information to the recused Attorney General. And nobody has been able to give me a straight answer. But we do, I think, know that at least those two senior department officers have some access to the special counsel investigation, and if they do, why not the chief of criminal? And my inability to get a straight answer is what is part of the problem here.
So as I understood, you said you had no evidence that it actually was occurring, that you're worried it could occur. Is that right?
Well, I think we know that there actually is access for Rod Rosenstein, that there has been access for Dana Benty, and I assume there will be access for Demers when he's cleared. So we know that there's access for those two, I believe. Again, the department hasn't nailed that down because they've given us this ridiculous quick and dirty response.
Mr. Chairman, I think we just need to